By the way, I worked 3 jobs and double majored in computer science and math as an undergraduate. And then when I went to law school, I worked full-time during the day and went to law school at night in a 4-year program. I messed up my FAFSA paperwork. I also lost the house I grew up in, and I was homeless and everything else. I thought the only way out of this life that I grew up in was to be like a high-powered lawyer, you know? And that was like all I had set on at that point. And then that all kind of fell apart.
Well, if you've been your customer, that's like a fast start, and it's almost a hack as an entrepreneur.
It didn't feel crazy while it was happening. Looking back and saying you sell a company to Oracle sounds wild, right? I don't think I'd ever seen a piece of technology that shocked me as much as that. If you think that the downside cost is high, just wait till you get the bill from doing nothing.
Today, I'll be sitting down with Vic Pelicano, a serial entrepreneur and the founder of Aviana, which is an artificial intelligence company that has built technology that allows you to use natural language to control robots. Lucid Bots is thrilled to say we have officially acquired Aviana. We're excited to talk about what comes next for the two of our companies as we now combine forces. I'll just dive right in. And Vic, I've had the pleasure of getting to know you over the last couple years, and I know you as this compassionate, driven, and successful entrepreneur who sold a company to Oracle. That's kind of an exclamation point on the resume. But what I'd love to learn is, what were you like as a kid, and when did you get kind of your first bug to do something entrepreneurial?
That's a really good question. I think as a kid, I was pretty reserved. I grew up in, there was like lower middle class America. Dad was a truck driver. Nobody went to college in my family. In fact, in my family, when they said somebody was in college, it meant jail. Like, that's the house I grew up in. We was like one step above a trailer park. There was a trailer park down the street. Nobody went to college, anything like that. And so I only had a couple of friends, and just sort of, that was how I grew up, right? My dad, though, for being a truck driver and not very, traditionally smart or educated, was really into like ham radios and kind of new technology. And he brought a Packard Bell home when I was like 13 years old. And then that was it. And then like I took that thing all apart, flipped it over 1,000 times and installed Linux on it. And back then you couldn't install Linux like you can now.
That's impressive.
Yeah. I had to find a stranger online and give him my address, and he had to mail me CDs, 9 CDs to install Linux, which bricked my computer.
And this was when it was scary to share your address online,
right,
too.
Yeah.
So you're still alive to tell the tale.
Yeah, it worked out. And yeah, I was really passionate about that, and then got myself into some trouble learning to code, which is the whole reason most people get into technology, because you want to bend the rules a little bit. And then, I think entrepreneurial, when Shark Tank was kind of what did it for me, was watching Shark Tank and just watching people pitch, and I'd never seen it like that. It was like free business school, and then I tried to do something with that. I think if you Google hard enough, you'll find my closet video somewhere where I tried to pitch to Shark Tank. Didn't make it, thankfully, but then started Verennia, and yeah, did pretty well there, obviously. So we sold that line of business a couple of years ago to Oracle, and now here I am with you after the next sale.
Awesome. Well, I've got a lot of questions leading into that. But no, before we hopped on the podcast, we were talking about the importance of working in the food industry. Could you reshare some of those insights and stories? Because I think it's so valuable.
I think all good young businesses start from a like service first standpoint, because you can't beat the incumbents. You're blessed because there's not, nobody else is doing what you do in the world. But for the rest of us that are getting into something somebody else does, the simple answer is, how can you beat them? Is just give better service. It's as old as time, that story, right? And I think there's a lot of books written about that, and a lot of academic work. And I just think there's nothing like doing it, right? Yeah. And I know I'm an old guy with gray hair, and it's like, you got to go through the fire. But that's part of it. There's some things you can't learn in the textbook. And like, when somebody's mad at you and it's not your fault, and you've had a long day and you're sweaty, and, you have every reason to stick up for yourself, but you don't. Mm-hmm. That can't really be taught. You know what I mean? Like, and you can't put somebody into a hyperdrive in a classroom and then test their feedback. You know what I mean? Like, I think those in retail, I've heard those stories. I never worked retail, but I've been on a pizza place on a Friday night in the dead of summer when it's 110 degrees and everybody's yelling at each other and stuff's wrong and going sideways. And that's really where you forge that kind of like working under pressure thing. And then all of a sudden an angry email doesn't seem like that big a deal. You know what I mean? I feel like I can handle this with grace. It's not going to upset me, whatever's in there. I've been called every single name by every single type of person over the years, and it just has no impact after a while. It's hard to get you going. And I think when you're looking for somebody who does support or you're starting a business, there's nothing like having the thick skin to just take it, and absorb it for them and then make them happy. And if you can do that, man, you can do anything.
Amen. I think entrepreneurship is so challenging, and oftentimes people get into it because they've got this big idea, and what they fail to realize is there's a lot of great execution that needs to happen before that big idea materializes into something. And when you've got this backlog, this history of hard things you've done and overcome in the past, to your point, all of a sudden that angry email on a Friday night, it seems a little bit more digestible than if you didn't have those experiences.
100%. And I think, that's just a good differentiator. Everybody's wondering what the next new hot product is. Like, you're leading the world in this robotics thing, and now you've got AI, and there's all kinds of like new stuff to do, and everybody's looking for that new angle. But you can, as long as you do something better than somebody and you provide better service, you can earn a good living. And I think being an entrepreneur, right, you don't have to be like in super cool tech, or you don't have to invent a new product or get a patent. Like, people just want to be serviced better, right? The incumbents get tired, they stop providing the service. And that's how you can get in there. And that's how you can make a name for yourself and grow it from there. And manufacturing, especially, I've spent a lot of years here now. And what's the saying you guys have? 80% of your business with 20% of your customers is the old adage. And, that's gone in the tech world and stuff like that, because they don't exist in a world where they're working with the same companies. They're hyper growth, they're churn and burn, and I came from a background where like you earn somebody's trust as a customer, and you make promises and you deliver on those promises and you provide support, and that's part of the contract. I don't think about it in the way those other tech companies do, and that's why I'm really excited to see this get partnered with a manufacturing entrepreneur like you.
So you mentioned being in the manufacturing space for a good number of years now, and I'd love to go back to those earliest days in manufacturing. But before we get there, I know you've got a little bit of a legal background, and I think that's a story worth sharing. So I'll let you take it away.
So when I was in high school, and I was destined for computer science at this point, I was basically doing the computer classes at my high school. And I was going to go to U of I, and my mom got sick with terminal cancer. And so I had to stay closer to the house. So I went to a little school just a few miles away, so I could be closer. She passed away halfway through my sophomore year, so I was like 19 years old. And it was always her dream that I went to law school. And I'll tell you, I wasn't super ambitious about it. I liked the books, like, she bought me a series like Debate the Constitution and stuff like that. I like to read that stuff, but I never really had a passion for it. And then, so I ended up going to Loyola Chicago. And the job market was not great, right? Around then for software engineers, especially from a no-name school. So I went to law school at Loyola Chicago, and by the way, I worked 3 jobs and double majored in computer science and math as an undergraduate. And then when I went to law school, I worked full-time during the day and went to law school at night in a 4-year program. And my dad died more suddenly than my mom about halfway through my 3rd of 4th years. And I messed up my FAFSA paperwork. I also lost the house I grew up in, and I was homeless and everything else. But the important part of this story is I didn't screw up I screwed up the FAFSA paperwork, and then Loyola said, we can't send you back for your last semester. And I said, well, if I can scrape together the money, can I come back the semester after? And they're like, no, this one class you need to graduate is only offered every 4 years. So that was it. And that was the end of my law school life. So I had a friend that moved back into town, and I used her van for a little while, and then eventually moved in with her in an apartment. And she got me a job at Friedman Seating Company in Chicago doing bus seat sales. And here I was computer programming. I was doing all this law stuff. I thought the only way out of this life that I grew up in was to be like a high-powered lawyer, and that was like all I had set on at that point. And then that all kind of fell apart. And I started doing sales at a manufacturing company. And I loved it. I loved everything about it. Also, I loved the fact getting off at 5 o'clock was the first time that ever happened to me. I double majored in undergraduate and then worked full time and went to law school at night. Like, I had an infinite amount of time as far as I was concerned. And I realized I like people a lot. I like talking to people. I like servicing customers. and then started to automate my own job there in sales. And then that's what Verennia turned into, was a sales automation company for manufacturers. So spawned Verennia from that.
So, what was the specific problem you saw within your work where you're like, yes, I'm going to go and build Verennia now? When was that moment where you're like, hey, this is more than just me making my life a little bit easier at my job, and I think this is a future company?
I don't think it, I think nowadays people are much more attuned to like, what is the market? Should I get in there? What's a product market fit strategy? I didn't think about it like that. I just thought like, this paperwork I have to do sucks. Like we'd sell a bus seat and then I'd have to go do all this paperwork and use all these spreadsheets and Word documents. And I was like, this should all just be automated, right? And then I started automating it and everybody was like, this is really cool. And they bought some software to do it and the software couldn't do it as well as I could through the software I'd built. And I was like, well, if they paid all this money for that software, they'll pay more for mine because it's better, right? So yeah, that's kind of where it came from. But also just kind of the attitude that like a lot of the software I'd seen at that point in manufacturing for what we did, CPQ, was like 20, 30 years old. It was client server, it was Java based, it was just bad. And there wasn't like a modern cloud version of it. And so, kind of just all the pieces came together for us to build it. But it was really like the idea, everybody was going to e-commerce and kind of these online tools then, self-service portals, stuff like that. So it all kind of fit for us that we were like building the product to fit the market as the market was coming into existence, more than like just trying to build some like cool piece of technology, right? We were saying like, what are people doing? What do people struggle with? And I think me as a user, right, because I was in manufacturing sales, I had a lot of authority going into these accounts and saying like, I sat here and did this job. Here's why it sucked. Here's the things I screwed up. And here's how the software helps you from doing that. And then telling those stories to my sales reps and stuff like that and having them repeat them, it just helps add credibility to the whole thing, And it helps you build a better product because you're serving yourself.
I think that's such an important insight because too often you see entrepreneurs like, I'm going to go and build this product. And really, what you want to start with is what is a problem you're solving for your customer? Because you could build a lot of shiny bells and whistles, but at the end of the day, you need to build something that matters. And it's like, okay, how do you discern if this actually matters? Well, if you've been your customer, that's like a fast start, and it's almost a hack as an entrepreneur because you can accelerate that development because you can just think, well, what are the things that sucked about my job that would be much easier if I all of a sudden had this tool? So that sounds like a great experience.
Absolutely agree. I think there's so much to that, like digging into your own psyche and being able to tell it. It adds authority. It helps you build a better product, a better company, everything else to service the market. Yeah.
So, Vic, as I've gotten to know you and also a lot of your coworkers over the years, one thing I've always admired is how you've treated your people and how you built your team. There's a tremendous amount of loyalty, and I'll just say output. Like everybody's a hustler. They're incredibly competent, capable, but the word I'd use above all is just caring. And that's something that's always struck me. Could you tell me a little bit about how you built that culture?
Yeah. I think it's from my seat. When I hire people, I am very clear about the expectations and I tell them that they're going to make mistakes and I tell them about the mistakes I've made and how I learned from them and that I fully expect them to make mistakes and that they won't be, there won't be big ramifications for it, right? We're all learning together in this. I think there's a lot of just admitting when you're wrong from my seat, is saying like, I was wrong. This was a bad idea. Like the market doesn't want this thing I thought that it wanted, or this architecture isn't going to work the way I thought it would, or I thought I can handle that customer, but I can't because they just demand too much. And I think when the employees see you hang your head and just say, I messed up, then they know that it's okay. There's some things, I'll be honest, are a little bit intolerable, like showing up late to meetings and stuff like that, like not okay. We work remotely. You can't you can't turn the computer on in time.
I'm stuck in traffic though, Vic.
Yeah. So some of that stuff I do have a very short leash for, but the holistically, like I'm fine with mistakes as long as you learn, right? And I acknowledge when I screw up, right? And I think when people see that, they're encouraged to share. I think it's tough to learn anything if you were never wrong. And I think because if you were right, what's to learn? So if they won't admit they were wrong, in fact, during my interview process, that's the one question I always ask is, tell me something you did wrong and how you fixed it. And you get a few different answers from that. But the person who it can acknowledge, you can hear it when they tell you the story, that they were wrong, they actually learned. Because if you don't acknowledge you were wrong, you have nothing to learn. And if you have nothing to learn, you don't grow. And if you don't grow, you can't work here.
So I know you've got a beautiful family and some incredible kids. How do you try to teach them that lesson?
I tell them when I'm wrong as often as possible. I screwed that up. I messed this up. I tell them about the mistakes I made that were similar. In fact, I just had this conversation with my 8-year-old last night or the night before, and he called me. He was really upset because he said something that he shouldn't have said. And I said, I used to say that stuff all the time. Just knock it off. Don't be too hard on yourself. And he was like, you used to? And I was like, yeah. It's not the end of the world, kid. We learn, right? And that's what I was blessed to have parents who did that with me. And I think a lot of people want to hide that. They want to hide away who they were. And then I think it gives this false impression to everybody else that everybody doesn't start at the same spot, So they think there's just some magic in some people, and that ain't it, It's that we're all learning and we all do this together and we're patient with each other. So I think just acknowledging when you screw up, that simple thing is enough. And people think it'll take away from like their magistry or something with, the magic somebody else sees you with, but you have to take some of that shine off, to make them know that you're human and then acknowledge their own mistakes and be able to learn with you,
Yeah. So Vic, if we kind of reflect over all of it you just said, life threw some major challenges and hardships your way. It seems like there are also a lot of learning lessons from that. And that's where you get a lot of your fortitude. Then you transition into manufacturing, where you kind of started at a low-level job and then continue to grow in that role, but also start to plant the seeds for what became Verennia. And then if we fast forward through all the growth at Verennia, at the very end, there's an exclamation point of selling the company, but not just selling it to a company like Oracle. Can you tell me what that was like, just knowing where you'd been in the past and then get to that dream outcome of getting to sell the company?
Well, I didn't want to sell the company. But after enough time, I had an older co-founder who was in his 60s, and it was time for him to get his exit. But I think that's the first piece, right? Is building something you don't want to part with. And that has to be really, really good for everybody involved to do. And that's what the Oracle deal was, right? It was like the culmination of my journey as an entrepreneur. I'd never even been an official manager anywhere outside of a pizza shop before I started Verennia, right? Now I was a tech CEO and I was selling to huge strategic, no fundraising, no board, just me, right? And 2 partners that we started this with and just figuring it out. And so it was kind of the end of that. And I think, from that, I learned that I've done something like, it didn't feel crazy while it was happening. Looking back and saying you sell a company to Oracle sounds wild, right? But when it's happening, it's like, it's just the process. The process as an entrepreneur. You're just like, what's the next thing I got to do? What's the next thing I got to do? So you're just doing that. And then when it's all done, you look back and you're like, whoa, that just happened, but you don't look back while you're doing it. That is better than anybody.
Yeah. So you then... you said a line like, what comes next? What's the next problem? So I want to transition into talking about Aviana. Where did the original seed of that idea come from?
I think seeing ChatGPT for the first time, I don't think I'd ever seen a piece of technology that shocked me as much as that. And I'd been in the enterprise software space for, I don't know, a long time at this point. And the second I opened that thing up, I don't remember if it was 3.5 or the launch of 4.0. Maybe it was 3.5 because I think that was a good model. I was like just blown away, like I had read about AI and how the predictive models worked and stuff, and it all made sense, but I'd never seen, basically autocomplete that was that good, right? And the science behind it was all sound. And boy, I mean, just opening it and talking to it was like, spent like a week talking to that thing, had an existential crisis. Like, am I just a chatbot? Like, is that what this all is, And then after that settled.
This is a simulation.
I mean, there's still a lot there to unpack, but I settled all that down and said, like, what are people going to do with this, right? And you remember at the time, a couple of years ago, the labor shortage was really severe. Like, it's still not great, the labor here, but it's a little better now. But back then I was like, I can't see it slowing down. The economy's so hot. We have the gig economy. People basically have infinite jobs at this point with Uber and Instacart and all this other stuff. You can just a handy thumbtack. You can go find work to do for yourself. And I was like, given that, man, what's going to happen, right? And so I started thinking about it, and that's how I got introduced to you. I was like, we need robots. That's the labor fill, right? And to do especially jobs that are dangerous and really dirty and that people just don't want to do, as people have more choices in the labor market. So I thought, as I was exploring robotics, I was also exploring AI. And I was looking at my Roomba one day, watching it just wander aimlessly around the carpet, like missing the one spot that I turned it on to do. There's one thing on the floor I wanted it to clean, and it just would not do it. And I was like, this thing is so dumb. And I was like, how can ChatGPT be so smart? And this thing is so dumb. I couldn't square that thing. And I was like, there's going to be a lot of robotics companies coming up, and they're going to solve a lot of really hard problems that we need solved. And boy, these AI tools are coming on so fast and furiously that if I can build a system that can handle those tools and be easily installable onto the robotics, that boy, we're going to find some great partners and be able to make the robots live up to their potential. The robot was a great vacuum. It's just dumb, and that was the biggest robotics company on earth was iRobot or whatever that, which is still funny. They named it that. And that was the biggest one on earth, and it was that dumb. And here I'm looking at ChatGPT, and I'm like, I got to square this peg. So I started Aviana to do that.
That's incredible. And I think there are so many important themes in there. Like the first one is we're having a harder time finding labor to do a lot of these essential services. And there's this growing need and demand for robots. And at the same time, software and AI, it's getting so sophisticated, so capable. Yet we look at the most common robot, which is the one a lot of us have in our house. It's the Roomba. And it's about as dumb as a robot could possibly be. So I love that just simple thinking of how do I marry those two? Taking a very competent AI system and then getting some output that is robotic action. But I know my grandma's probably going to listen to this podcast at some point in time. So if you were to describe Aviana in the simplest terms possible, how would you describe the product?
Imagine you didn't need the controller from your robot and you could just talk to it and tell it what to do and it can understand you. It's not a person, okay? There's a lot of computer software involved in this, but that's the end output. So I'd tell grandma, like, hey, for your Roomba, imagine it was a lot smarter and you could tell it, hey, get that spot in the middle of the room. And it did it. That's what Aviana does.
That was beautiful. And what I love about that is, as I've spent, now my whole career in the robotics industry, what I've noticed is what makes robots really difficult to scale for companies is one, the integration of it. Like, how do I learn how to use these robots? How do I train my people to use them? And then ultimately, like, how do I scale and support them? And the prime difficulty there is how accessible is it? And today, robots, I've either got to learn the controller and be coordinated on joysticks, or I've got to be a senior software engineer who really understands how to write code that could automate these movements. But now with Aviana, you can take your natural language and you can talk to it like I'm talking to you right now and say, hey, Vic, could you take a sip of your coffee? And I think that's what's truly incredible about Aviana is it makes it more accessible and it truly makes it feel like you've got a coworker in the room.
Agree. And I want everybody to know that you told me to take a sip of my coffee and I did it because I'm a robot.
Yes.
That is what it is, right? It's taking it to the next level because I agree with you that the robotic adoption is at a minimum at this point because they're dumb or they're hard to use. And I think AI fixes both those problems. I think for a technology as powerful and as useful as robotics, there deserve to be more. And that is the problem is the promise of robotics of companies like yours is that it will automate jobs for us and make the world safer, better, cleaner. And it hasn't delivered on that. Why? Because you haven't automated the labor. You just move the labor from one tool to a joystick. And I think AI is the answer to get it over that next hump, which is how do you actually automate the labor? Because we haven't done that. All the robotics in the world haven't done that really, unless it's like a press or something like that, or a tube bending machine or something like, and it's a very narrow thing that it does, right? There's not general purpose stuff out there. And I think that era is going to awaken in all of us the ability to, you know, have more work done for us by something we can afford, right? With labor rates being high and everything else. Yeah, I mean, doing work at your house, even if, to your grandma's point, right? Like, you know, if she needs the house painted, she might call somebody right now and get a quote, and they might want $5,000, $10,000 to paint a house. Now, you know, with the labor market and labor rates and stuff, you know, 10 years from now, I think that cost goes way down because a Lucid Bot, you know, is out there doing the painting for a few $100 in materials. And the guy who's running that bot and holds that service, he can be doing 10 of them at the same time. And now the world becomes more efficient. People get what they want and they get it cheaper. And what else are we looking for if not that?
I think what impressed me most about Aviana, and even from the earliest demos, is just how dynamic it is. And I use that word very intentionally because I often think we've been building robots for decades at this point, but a lot of them have been in manufacturing settings. So I've been at this fixed point on the line. I've got one task. And if I write the right code, I can do that same task over and over and over again. But that's not really helpful in applications like ours, where each time our customers are going to different job sites and they need to be able to navigate in these complex environments. And I remember when we were doing a demo with your team, we did just a simple mission, and it was, hey, drone, I want you to take off. And I forgot what altitude we said, maybe 100 feet. And I want you to fly forward until you find a red car in the parking lot. And it did it. It had no idea about the context of its environment. It was just running some computer vision AI on top of it and then commanding the drone based off what it saw, but also what we said to it. And to me, when I first saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, I can have a conversation with this drone and I can ask it to do very specific things without it even knowing this is its environment. That's when I realized like, this technology can change the world.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, that's what I saw when I looked at ChatGPT and saw a robot, was like, everything changes now. Like the world we existed in and we thought we were building, even in the software space, like I've been forever, is gone. You know, the new era is going to be this. And what it is, you know, you needed these. I think about it as like, what really changed was the level of inputs you needed. The output from the drone's the same drone that used to exist, right? What's different is you used to have to normalize the data. And so that meant that the packaging robot, the box had to meet these specifications and be within these tolerances, or it had to squeeze it down into those tolerances to get it to fit because that machine was dumb, right? And I think what AI, the simplest way to explain it is, what it does is you can leave all that infrastructure that existed before, but now you can deal with dynamic inputs because the AI can take the world and standardize it down to the world the robot needs to deal with. Because the robot still, at the end of the day, has to deal with a standard size thing because it doesn't have, you know, it doesn't have dexterous fingers, stuff like that. But still, I'm going to get kind of crazy here. I mean, we can only deal with certain things of certain sizes and certain spaces, but we know how to coordinate it all because we can take the inputs and our brain can crunch it down and translate it into movements. And that's what we built Aviana to be, is the brain, right? And so what it does is it takes that outside world and squeezes it down into robotic controls that then the robot can do, right? Without having to process it all locally, which can get very expensive and power draining at this point.
I have so much excitement about the technology. We could probably talk about it for hours. But to transition a little bit, in a world of opportunities, what was it about Lucid Bots that excited you, and why did you decide to join forces?
I mean, I don't know that there's a better opportunity. There's a lot of robotics companies, I would say, and I've talked to a lot of them, and we had a lot of great conversations, but I think you are far and away way farther along with product market fit than any of them, right? I mean, I don't know how many of them even have deals, right? They all have ideas. They're all in their basement, and they're great people, by the way. A lot of them really, really smart engineering guys and stuff like that. But they haven't found that repeatable sale thing yet. And really, you need that to be able to move this kind of stuff. It's like you have to have a product that's kind of flying off the shelves. And so your product is the first thing that interested me. And then when I met you and saw how passionate you were about the space and about AI in general, even aside from Aviana, just self-teaching yourself about it, and having met the team and the board and everybody else. And I was like, this is an opportunity we can't pass up because there is a dream scenario here for Aviana and a partner like Lucid, but the window is closing because 5-10 years from now there's going to be some big established players here, and I had to bet on a horse, and I thought you're killing it and you're super smart and we get along well, so this is the right one.
Well, thank you. I'm biased, but I'd agree with a lot of those things. I think that the equation we always talked about when we were starting to discuss this deal was, how do we make 1+1 = 3 in this situation? And I think we both looked honestly and we're like, how could it not equal 3, if not something much more than that? Because it's two very unique parts of what needs to happen for this vision of robots to truly be realized. Like at Lucid, we always like to ask ourselves the question, how do we know we're spending our time in the right way and playing a game that's worth winning? We typically come back to like 3 major points. And the first truth is that the future of manual work is robots. And you can look at all kinds of industries to realize that's where we're going. Like 100 years ago in agriculture, about 40% of the US workforce worked in agriculture. Today, it's about 1.6%. And I don't think your kids are probably going to go into agriculture unless you think differently. The second point is we believe that everything that moves will be automated. The same way Teslas are getting automated right now, so too will boats and also robots. And then lastly, it's that combination of robots and automation that creates this world of abundance. Like you look at things, decades ago, if I wanted to have a TV in my house, I would need to be middle to upper class. And would it even have color? Probably not. But now for $200, you can go and get a 4K flat screen TV. And a lot of that is because we really automated a lot of that manufacturing journey. And
Can I throw on there
Sure.
real quick? And a lot of that is because we outsourced all the labor to people that do it for $2 an hour. And we found out the problem with that recently. And we're scaling that back. But the only way to bring it back here and preserve our way of life without putting our kids in factories, like some of those countries do, is robots.
Amen.
There's kids making Nikes right now, little children, and I say that wearing Nikes, so I'm well aware of my hypocrisy here. But the only reason that Nikes don't cost $1,000 or $2,000, and I grew up where a big screen TV cost 10 grand, and that was 90s dollars, 10 grand, and now it's so cheap because we've moved it all offshore, right? But we're seeing the problems with that now, and the supply lines all tied up and stuff. The way to bring any of it back is robots. It won't work the other way. No, regardless of your level of automation, because to create those big scenarios inside factories where you're doing automated work like that, the product can't move. The product can't change. When you build a big machine that does XYZ, it has to do XYZ all the time, to our points, right? Earlier. And so, TVs can't get better, cheaper, faster if you're a fully automated facility. Those things are counterbalanced, right? The way is robots. So completely agree with you there. That's the only way forward if we're going to bring manufacturing back to this country and limit our, you're always going to have free trade and stuff like that. But if you're going to bring a significant part back, especially as it relates to national security and things like that, we need the robotics or we'll never get there.
I agree. And I'm glad you brought up the example of shoes. I don't know if you saw it, but last week was a big headline. The shoe company On has this spray-on robot that makes shoes. And there's an Olympian marathoner who's going to be wearing a shoe that was sprayed on and made by a robot.
Nice.
So hopefully soon the cost-effective, scalable shoes are here, and your Nikes might be $10 or less sometime soon.
I doubt that.
Well, going back to our relationship, I think where a lot of the synergy comes from as well is this can move a lot faster when you've got a practical use case. And the unfortunate truth I see with a lot of robotic peers today is they're building exceptional technology, but they haven't really found that customer base and that ROI point for the market to go out and sell it. And now with Aviana becoming kind of the brain layer of our technology stack, we've got this customer fleet spread across the country where we can really accelerate our development because we're going to get more and more insights from the data, from the customers. And I look at all these other people trying to build the general purpose robot brain, and they'll raise hundreds of millions of dollars, but they don't have a working product. And I think about how long all this takes, like to build your first prototype, to hire the right team, to stand up a facility, to stand up a production line, now 2 production lines, build the repair department. There's so many time intensive parts of the hardware that now we really get this nice synergistic relationship because we've got all the pieces of the puzzle present at the table. I think that's one of the things that excites me most about our relationship.
I agree. And I think that's why you're in a really unique position to absolutely change the world with this technology, because you have so many deployed robots. I don't know if you have a count, but I'd imagine you're in the upper tiers of deployed robots in the world, which is crazy, right? And you're just getting started. So the amount of data you'll get, unique data, nobody else is going to have the data that you're going to pull in, is going to feed the models and improve the product to the degree that it will be very, very difficult to do in a lab. And it's sort of like it's funny, I'll tie it back to, we were talking about working in the kitchen earlier. It's kind of the same thing, because you can't duplicate experience. And your robots and your AI will have experience by the end of this that nobody else can get, that you can't come up with just at Stanford or whatever and doing stuff in a field somewhere. It's the only way to do what you're doing now is by doing what you're doing now and putting in these however many years. How long have you been doing this?
7 years now.
So if somebody wants to put in a decade and acquire an AI company, maybe in 20 years you have a legit competitor. Until then, you're the only one out there with this kind of breadth of technology and robotics deployment.
So going back to the technology, we've talked a lot about like the automated output, and that's the vision, right? If you can get the robot to autonomously do the task. One of the other things that really excited us about Aviana is the computer vision that can go on while the robot is in action as well. And we see a lot of value for that for our existing customer base. Could you talk a little bit about that line of the product and some of the capabilities?
Yeah, it's about normalizing the inputs, right? So to be able to normalize the same way it's hard to do a job if you're blind, like any job in the world, and no offense to the visually impaired out there, but it just makes it harder. It's a harder thing to do. And the same thing with the computer, right? And LLMs and stuff like that. Like they can only do so much with the world without seeing. And that tech, the vision stuff has come so far, right? So, to be able to just look around and say, how far am I from something, and, wiggle back and forth a little. That's how our eyes work, right? So that's the difference between LiDAR and this other stuff. I'd say broadly, there's so many applications. Navigation is kind of the core of it, right? Mm-hmm. Like where to go, how far am I from something, collision avoidance, safety. But beyond that, when you're working in, relatively controlled environments like you guys are, close to buildings, things like that is, do you notice structural defects on the building? What else are you seeing that can help them do their jobs better? And so as you get into things like that, and I know drones are very commonly used in a lot of places with real estate, right? So all those things involve typically now somebody with a controller flying it, looking, taking pictures, analyzing the photos. Can we squeeze that down? Can we do it more regularly? Can you set up the drone and say, hey, clean the building once a week? And it just cleans the building once a week and there's no other hassle, right? How do we get to that point? And that's, I think Aviana's part of that equation. And by the way, I don't know how you get to that point. Hopefully you know. But that's part of it, right? Is people, I think, when I think about how my kids are going to interact with technology, they're not going to sit in front of silly big screens like this and keyboards and monitors like we did that. That's going to seem dumb to them. They're just going to talk to stuff. That's how it's going to work. And so the robots are the same way. So when you want to alter its, directive of like, hey, reschedule this, you're not going to open the scheduling app and click a bunch of things. You're going to tell it, hey, you know what? Clean this every week. And it'll be like, okay, what day you want me to clean it? It'll just have a conversation like a person. And that's how, and it'll do all its own configurations and manage itself. And then you're really saving people time. Right now, you're just shifting the work from the blue collar guy to the white collar guy. But what we want to get to is a point where the work is just done And, the actual consumer or the property manager or whatever can just do the work, and just by their voice and saying this is what needs to happen, and then having it happen without having to hand it to a staff to translate their messages into configuration settings. Did that make sense?
It's a beautiful vision for the future, but not everybody shares that vision in the way that we see it. So I'm curious if I say artificially intelligent robots, and there are people out there concerned that they're going to take all the jobs or take over the world, what would you say to them?
I would ask them for one example of technology that took somebody's jobs, because I never seen it. And I'm not young, but I'm not old, or the other way. I'm not old, but I'm not young. And I can't, I've asked this question to 100 people and nobody's ever told me a piece of technology that took their jobs. So, all the secretaries thought when the computers came in and the filing cabinets went away that their jobs would be gone. All the people that worked on horses and made shoes and everything else saw the cars and thought their jobs would be gone. And it just never happens. It's fake. It's the fakest news there is, and it's the story as old as time, I think. So I would say, show me an example. And I nobody seems to have one. Okay. Do I think work will change? Yes. Do I think people will be inconvenienced as a result? Yeah. But their inconvenience comes at the cost of us getting better. Nobody would trade the work world today for the work world of 100 years ago. No matter what they say on Twitter or Reddit or whatever, if they go look at a day in the life of 100 years ago, and it's our job to keep pressing forward. I think it's right to be concerned and to look at it and to guide the technology and to guide the regulatory environment to make sure that it fits into what we want to do, but you can't put it behind. And it's our one opportunity. It's our one opportunity to bring this work back to this country is this, because you're not going to win on labor. And we have too many environmental laws and things like that to compete, honestly. So what you need is robotics to do the work. That's just what has to happen. Again, so maybe you go from turning the wrench to having a robot turn the wrench for you or whatever. And it enables you to be more than what you are. The technology will augment you to be more than that. And I think those fears are largely just from the Terminator and iRobot and things like that. I can't see a scenario like that.
It's funny because I think what always gets underestimated in this conversation is that humans have this insatiable desire to consume more and more and more. And there's this sort of like, oh, if we're able to have a robot do this dangerous and demanding job that people don't really want to do to begin with, what's going to happen to those jobs? What's going to happen to those people? Well, we continue to create new industries, new products, and quality of life continues to rise. Like I gave the agriculture example earlier, yet if you look at hunger levels versus 100 years ago, we're more well-fed than we've ever been, and that trend should continue. And I just keep going back to like human nature. Our human nature is we just consume things. And the concept of DoorDash to people living in the 1950s, like you pay for somebody to make your food and deliver it to you. Like these are unheard of things. So I think that's one thing I'd really want to stress to people that get concerned of like, well, what about these jobs? Because there are all these new jobs that exist that didn't exist even 10, 20 years ago. Like being a social media influencer, a lot of kids dream of doing that now. That wasn't a job back in the 80s.
Yeah. Neither was computer programmer really or anything else. And who knows what world they'll grow up in, right? But I know we'll all be okay, I guess is my broad feeling. And I agree with you. I'm optimistic that the world keeps getting better. I think I get challenged to find any way it was ever better than it is today. It's safer, it's cleaner. I grew up in the 90s and there was McDonald's bags on the side of the road everywhere. Yeah. And now granted, I didn't grow up in the nicest place, maybe not in your neighborhood, but that neighborhood now it's cleaner, it's better, it's safer. Statistically it is, so I think it's a fear of the unknown and a fear that it won't be better. Right. And I think that's legitimate. I think though, and also there's kind of this thing when you're young, you're willing to break the system down because the system, you're not tied into it. And as you get a little older and more established, you're kind of bought into the system. So the thought of it changing is like scary because it all work, your 401k, everything's set up a certain way. And you need to have predictability that it's going to exist this way for a while to not have that thing. And also some people just don't have risk tolerance. But I can tell you that at least in my lifetime, the world is better, safer, cleaner than it's ever been. And I see no reason that doesn't continue. I can't imagine how this technology makes it worse.
So, to all the business owners out there that work in these service industries where robots are a very uplifting force, wh- what would you encourage them to think about? Like, how should they be thinking to really make use of robots as something that can uplift their people and their companies, as opposed to something to be fearful of?
That's a good question. I think the question they have to ask themselves is, how much more scalable does my company become with technology? Like, how has technology in general helped me in the past? Has it helped me become more scalable? Like, since you got email, since you got a cell phone, since you got, since your Tesla drove itself and you can, send emails in the car now when you're sitting in traffic. Like, has technology helped you? Yes or no? And so don't you want to give that, bless everybody else with that, right? Because you're getting a lot of automation on that side, but now we can bring it all the way down and help those people. My dad drove a truck for 30 years. He died when he was 46 years old he had so much wrong with him. He had gout, he had arthritis, he was wearing these long socks. He couldn't sit for too long, he couldn't stand for too long. The body wasn't made to do what the Industrial Revolution made us do with it, and even now, office environments, it's not made to sit in front of a desk for 8 or 10 hours a day. That's a chore we have to do because of the nature of work today. And I pray that we can automate away a lot of that so that, 20, 50 years from now, people aren't sitting crinkled over with, what's it called in your,
Carpal tunnel?
Yeah, carpal tunnel syndrome and all these other, I got like a bulging disc in my back, probably for sitting like this for too many hours a day, So can we create a world where people aren't forced to do that? Some are going to choose to, right? But if you ask anybody who's driven a truck that's in their 50s, if they would have liked to do a better job, and they would say, yeah, yeah. And I think it's condescending for people who don't do those jobs to stand up for those jobs. Because I think if you go ask it, and I have a blue collar family, right? And you go ask any of them, like, boy, you want your kids doing this? Almost 100% no. No, I want them to go to college and do something else because this job will ruin your body. It'll ruin your life. And I want them to see old age and be limber and happy, unlike me, who needs, beers on the weekends and stuff just to feel good. It's true. And if you go ask those guys, they'll tell you that. But there's this chorus of people, specifically like in the media that tries to stoke fears and say, well, what about these jobs? I'm like, the jobs that are breaking people apart physically, the jobs, if you go ask them if they could have done something else with their lives, they would. And they say, yeah, that those jobs, those are the ones you're trying to protect. And I'm not saying those people fire those people. I'm saying they're asking us, please, for the next generation of humans, make this better. And that's what we're trying to do here.
And I think, put very simply, I like to think about what makes us human. And it's not this ability to do a physical task in a repeated manner, right? There are a lot of animals out there in the kingdom that do repetitive tasks. They can do repetitive movements. What makes us human is this ability to be creative, to problem solve, to engage with one another, to build community. And robots are a vehicle by which we can allow humans to be more human. And the phrase we often say here is that the point isn't to replace the human touch, it's to extend the human reach. And that's what robots do, or in our case, artificially intelligent robots. They're going to unlock a whole new level of prosperity that we truthfully can't even comprehend today.
Yeah, you couldn't comprehend what the internet would do to the world. I mean, if you'd ask somebody when I was growing up and it was, 4K dial up, you know what I mean? Like, you couldn't imagine the world today, the interconnectedness, the speed at which everything moves, the way you can have teams working together from all over the world is incredible. It's incredible. And it's better, by the way. We're more connected than ever. We understand each other better. And yeah, there's a lot of hard stuff that comes with that, but so many more great things, right? And I think the same thing with this. Your line's great, the extending the human reach. And I think that's what it is we feel closer now to people in Europe and China and everywhere else than we ever did. It feels like it's right there. Where that was, 30, 40 years ago was a foreign concept, like nobody knew anything about it. Now watching it get together and the amount of good things that's come from that, and some bad things, admittedly, but way more good than bad.
Yeah. So Vic, let's do a little vision casting here. But 5 years down the road, what do you hope comes true at Lucid Bots and for our customer as a result of our partnership?
In 5 years, I can see a path to somebody not giving themselves carpal tunnel by squeezing the handle of a sprayer for 8 to 10 hours a day, and instead just setting up a bunch of lava bots all over the world, and me going to the gas station and having it be clean every single day, or to a parking lot and having it be clean every single day and look beautiful, without somebody having to hurt themselves to make things more aesthetically pleasing for me. That's a better outcome for everybody involved.
Yeah. I love that vision. And I think what I'd add to it is where we see the greatest opportunity is just making these things so simple that anyone could use them. So if you can speak the English language, or hopefully soon we'll get some translators on there and it won't even matter if it's English, you'll be able to interact with this robot and ask it to do what you need it to do so that you can focus on doing higher leverage tasks and completing the job with more efficiency, more effectiveness. So I'm excited about what's to come. To maybe ask a couple unrelated questions to AI. You're such a talented entrepreneur. I would waste the chance to not ask you more questions about that. For any entrepreneurs that are listening to us, what advice would you offer them?
I guess two pieces. One, just do it. Whatever it is, just do the thing. Just do it. Like, you're thinking about it too hard. If you're watching this and you're listening and you needed to hear this, you're thinking too much. Analysis paralysis. Just do it. Version 1's always going to suck. So get to version 1 now. And I guess, like at its core, if you don't sell it, it's a hobby. So, when you watch Shark Tank, back to Shark Tank, I always thought, man, they had this great product. Like, this is really cool. This is useful. Why are they on here raising money? It seems like they've got everything settled. What you start to realize after you get the rhythm of that show is they can't sell the thing. If they could sell the thing, they don't need to be there. And if you're not selling it, it's just a hobby. So you better not mind selling and marketing. And I know a lot of people have an aversion to that, but you're not going to be an entrepreneur without that. So you better practice. I make my goddaughter, she does softball, and she had like raffle tickets, and she came up to me a couple weeks ago. We were at my lake house, and she said, hey, I have these raffle tickets. They're $20 each or whatever. Do you want? And I said, well, what do I win? She's like, oh, well, I don't know. My mom, usually handles all that. And I said, you better sell me this thing or I'm not buying anything. Yeah. And she left. She came back about half an hour later, and then she had the pitch ready, and I made her sit there and sell it to me. And I asked her hard questions, and I was like, what if this, what if that, because you got to be comfortable in that environment. People don't want to live that way. There's a lot of people who just think that things should sell itself. Like, it's a good product, it'll work. That better than anybody, that is not how it works. Like, you have to carry it out there, and you have to let people beat you up about it and tell you it's not going to work, or it's not good enough, or it costs too much. And then you've got to, fight back and get through. And that's part of it. Right. So if you're going to build something great, do it and start selling it right away, and start selling it the day you start building it. Don't build it on a spreadsheet. Don't build it in your MBA class. Doesn't matter. The market decides. That's the only decider.
I'm looking forward to the book of Vic, because I think that's going to be a New York Times bestseller. And I love that first part, like, just do it. What I find is, to your point, people get stuck in analysis paralysis and they're scared to move, so they do nothing, right? And usually if you find yourself like, oh, I'm not doing something because I'm scared, it's a good reason to double click and really dive into like, well, why are you scared? The opportunity cost of doing nothing, it'll eat away at you. And the second point on sales, it's honestly shocking, especially in the younger generations. There's this natural aversion to sales because they think sales is the used car salesman that's pushing a product that the person doesn't really need. But no, sales is all about value. Like, have I made a product that creates value for the customer, and I am going to meaningfully improve this customer's life or business? And it's like, that's all you're talking about. Like, I'm sitting across the table from you saying, hey, Vic, with our product, I think you could make more money. I think you could do it in less time. I think you could lower your liability. Is that something you'd be interested in?
Yeah. I think some people have an issue where they feel like they've seen something horrible or a used car salesman or some awful things. And those do happen. No doubt. That's part of the free market, right? But you're smart. You figure it out. Turn down a bad deal. Also, it ain't the end of the world if you take a bad one. I've been scammed before when I was younger. I learned from that not to get scammed, and like it isn't the end of the world. You'll be fine. But if you believe in something in your heart, and by the way, everybody's selling all the time. What do you think a date is?
Yeah.
You're selling yourself. Everything's a sale. Everything is. When you're dating, you're going through lead flow. There's a lot of parallels there. Everything's a sale. You're always selling. When you dress a certain way, you're selling yourself. When you're doing this, you're selling this. We're always selling things to each other. Our concepts, our beliefs. You're selling your political beliefs to somebody. Well, I believe this because of this, because this. You're explaining your reasoning and you're trying to get them to buy into your side. You're selling. That's it. We're all doing it all the time. And but if you invent a product or a service that can improve somebody's life and you're passionate about it, you better sell it, and be comfortable taking the hits that come back from it. Otherwise, it's going to be a very long road to being an entrepreneur.
Yes. Always be closing, they say.
ABC.
So, Vic, something my wife and I just admire an extreme amount about you and your wife, Bex, is how you've taken your success and you created a platform to create a lot of good for other people. Could you tell us a bit about the Pelicano Foundation and the work you're doing?
Our family foundation is focused on teenagers. There's a local charity in our area called the Alive Center that my wife sits on the board of, and we give quite a bit of money to that and other charities like it, because that's when I had my hardest times. I wasn't a teenager like the age of kids these are. I was a little older, but my wife also experienced homelessness around that time in our lives, and we felt like there's a lot of philanthropic activity around younger kids and kids in the hospital and pets and stuff like that, but not so much for the teenagers, because they smell bad and they talk back and they do other unspeakable things. And as I think of myself as like I love chaos, right? And so I like teenagers while actively not liking the one in my house, some days. But I also love the pushback, because it's what moves the world, is that they're not like me, that he's not like me, and that he has different beliefs, different values, at his age. And that's okay. That's all part of it, and I think that needs to be encouraged more. And it does drive me a little nuts that even the charities we put into are still trying to create these controls. And like, if you think about it, it's the first time in human history we've ever tried to cage teenagers, is like the last 20 years, Other than that, when they were teenagers, I don't know when you were young, but when I was a teenager, you're just out in the world. They're not like that now. They're all like policed, sometimes physically, but certainly by the technology, like, oh, keep it on your phone so I can track where you are. Keep this, keep that. I don't know how they ever learned not to be policed. And now I think there's this generation of people being raised who are like perfectly comfortable with the idea of like the government watching everywhere they go and stuff like that, because it's what's happened to them their whole lives. So what's different? I think that is a long-term problem, but we try our best to direct, our philanthropic causes to things we see as under-addressed. And we struggled when we were teenagers, and we try to use our voice to guide what I was just saying was a problem to these organizations and say, like, how can you make these kids a safe space where you're also not hovering, where there's not as much structure? We live in this weird world where like you're supposed to do even now, little kids, you do baseball, then you do summer league, then you do pitching camps, then you do, this better than anybody. You're getting flashbacks. And then you do this, and then it's back to school, and there's no unstructured time. It's like you're doing this at this time. You have swim on Wednesdays. You have this, and I hate that. I hate. First of all, generically speaking, I avoid structure at all costs. My work life's very structured because it has to be like this meeting, this meeting, this meeting. But after that, I just kind of leave everything open so I can do what I feel. I don't let my kids sign up for any sports that have that rigorous scheduling because of exactly that. Because I want them just to play in the yard with their friends and just like, turn the hose on and make a mud pit, and like go to the park and play and come up with dumb games, like I think that's better for the brain than believing. I think the problem with structure is you end up in this world where you expect everybody else to be putting together your life, and you don't know how to deal with anything. And so the organizations the Family Foundation works with, we try, there's not a lot of them, unfortunately, try to encourage that open, unstructured play and just leave them alone. It's unbelievable that I have to put money into leaving the kids alone, but that's where we're at in this universe, is just let them go. Like, don't stop loving them, don't stop caring about them, but let them figure it out. Like, stop hovering over them. Even the charities, and they want to, like, oh, at this time we do this, at this time we do this, then we take them here, then we take them there. And I'm like, what time do you stop? Because that's what they want. They want you to go away. They want you to be there from the outside, like a safety net, not like a bag over their head. Sorry, this is a very personal thing for me, but that's where we put our money.
Yeah. Well, I love to see the passion in there. And I think it's so true. We live in a world that's become exceptionally algorithmic. You follow steps A, B, and C. And at the end of the day, like, humans, like, our natural instinct is to crave autonomy. Like, we like the ability to make our own choices. And if I say, Vic, don't do this, like, you're going to have natural aversion to that. You're not going to like it. Yet we've created a world where we do a lot less free play and free thinking. So I'm glad there's an advocate like you out there trying to push us back to maybe some more controlled chaos.
I did you ever see that orca at SeaWorld? I forget what they call it, Willie or something.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see its fin? How its fin is like this from being in captivity too long? That's like the teenagers today.
Yeah.
Is like they've been locked up too long. And I don't know if there's fixing it with them. But I hope that the next generation, and my great hope, frankly, is AI and robotics take the value of automation away from automating humans.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I said that right. But what I mean is, right now we value people who can do this the same way all day, or can read this textbook, digest it. Like, that is a value right now that people are attaining in college and elsewhere. And my hope is that this takes it away so that we have to let people out again and not teach them to be robots. Let the robots be robots. And how about we be people?
I couldn't agree more. Vic, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us today. I know we've covered a whole host of topics, anything from life to business, all the way to what the future of AI robots looks like. Are there any parting thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
I want to ask you,
Yeah.
what do you think about, the catastrophic doomsday sayers, the pessimists? Like, you've given some high level answers. I'm curious though, like, my 8-year-old watched Terminator and knew we were partnering together and said, is that what you guys are doing? Well, how would you answer him?
Oh gosh. So to the doomsday scenario, I'd say the first thing to acknowledge is so much would have to go wrong in order to get there. Because even if a robot is automated, there will always be physical limitations. Like, you think about a drone today, one of the biggest limitations, batteries. Like, I've got 20 to 30 minutes, depending on my makes and models, before that thing needs to come down and land. So now I need to automate the battery process. And how do I hot swap batteries? And sure, you can do that. But then how many cycles until that battery needs to be changed and we need another one? So we're very far away from, like, the full supply chain ecosystem being self-sustaining for robots. And honestly, I go back and forth because I'm very fearful of regulatory capture, because it happens a lot in business, and seldomly does it actually benefit the people. I know there's a story many years ago where a startup company wanted to provide free Wi-Fi to municipalities. It's like, how incredible will this be? Free Wi-Fi, access to education, uplifting resources. But it got blocked by a lot of the larger telecom companies because they wanted to charge you for access to that Wi-Fi. So I don't think my position is let's go in and regulate the robots, but I think it's something we talk about a lot internally. Like, in our mission statement, it's literally to build the world's most productive and responsible robots. And I think responsibility is something we need to continue to think critically about. Like, what responsible looks like today from a robot perspective is much more around safety for the operators involved, But I think in the coming years, as we get closer and closer to like, wow, everything is automated and interconnected. Now the robots can build the robots. That definition of responsibility is going to have to evolve. And what are the things we can put in place to actually police it so we truly have control?
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, right? I do see my way to humans kind of being rule writers by the end, right? Um, because the average thing will just kind of be done, and we'll be just be haggling over, different rules. And I don't know if that's a great outcome either, but I think it's necessary, right? I think the same thing. I think about AI like I think of people, right or wrong. I anthropomorphize it. I probably butchered that word. But I think about it that way, and I think the light hand of regulation is going to pay off again in the U.S. like it did for the internet, and I think that's why the EU chokes on everything technologically, because their first instinct is, I have an opinion on this, and I wear a suit, so you're going to do what I say, and then nothing ever happens. I think China is going to do a lot of good things. I could see in LATAM, and especially out in MENA and in Dubai and elsewhere, they're really putting a huge focus on it. I think what happens is you get these kind of different core models and core instances that have different truth statements, have different underlying truths and beliefs and values, and therefore decide things differently, and insight things differently and predict things differently. And I think that's good, because I think you need more than one. There can't be a hegemony in this. And I think what will come from that is the health of competition. I think about AI, like people compare it to nuclear weapons sometimes when they talk about war and, its possibilities there. But say we want about nuclear weapons, but there hasn't been a world war since, the mad doctrine people make fun of, but like, where's World War III? Everybody's scared to launch it for good reason, right?
I think that right there is a point worth highlighting because, again, sometimes I'm too philosophical, so forgive me, but war is usually caused when both sides misestimate the probability of winning. So if people know, like, I'm not going to go to war with the United States because no matter what, it could kick our ass, we could probably prevent some wars. And although it hasn't happened holistically, like we still have wars today, that's very evident. The number of lives lost compared to our previous wars, it's not same. It's dramatically different. I think part of that is like when you have access to technology that could be rather destructive, it naturally puts some healthy limitations in as well.
Yeah, it puts pause on everybody involved, because the blowback, I mean, the famous like Cuban Missile Crisis thing, right? Like, they misinterpreted a signal from one side and they were
Hmm.
ready to launch, and then they didn't, but if you don't have the nukes on the other side, maybe you don't pause, I mean, so yeah, I think it's a good thing to put everybody on the same thing. But that said, there's some scary stuff. And I think that's why it's important that we all do discuss it in a healthy way. I'm very optimistic about the future, because I have faith in people,
Hmm.
the human beings involved in these, I think will ultimately make the right decision, but it's going to evolve very rapidly. And I think leaving it to the best you can unconstrained will make it better in the long run, because you will still have a healthy environment. Like, look how much a computer's changed in the last, 40 years versus your car.
Hmm.
Car's the same thing,
Yeah.
you know? Very recently, we got some of the auto driving features in an electric car, but it's still the same thing, right? Because it's so regulated and there's such firm requirements on everything, it can't innovate.
Hmm.
Now, there's reasons for that, right? Safety, et cetera, blah, 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 standardization. But, there's a benefit if you're the government to only having 4 companies to police. Then there's somebody for Bernie Sanders to talk bad about. Then there's somebody like a specific name, the CEO of blah, 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 right? And there's a lot of advantages to regulatory capture for both sides of the political market. And plus, it makes them look like they're doing something useful, right? But at the end of the day, the free market tends to turn the stuff up, or actually exercising some of those anti-monopoly powers they have once in a while. The Microsoft thing was interesting recently, right? The whole like half the world went down because their software sucks. And, people are oversubscribed to Microsoft from a business standpoint. It's a huge liability,
Hmm.
and people don't look at that enough and say, how do we, like, if you had all your stock in that, if you looked at how much of any business's infrastructure runs on like a Microsoft stack, you'd be shocked. Because if there's one outage, you're in real trouble. That's critical infrastructure at this point, right? I'm not advocating for a government takeover. I'm just saying maybe it's time for us to take a look at that and say, how do we not overinvest in one vendor?
Yeah, the diversification across all assets of life can be a very, very healthy thing.
Unless it's your robots, and they should all come from Lucid Bots.
Yes, exactly. And I think to swing all the way back to the techno-optimist side of it, Vic, I think instead of working at the pizza shop, your kids will be chatting with a Lucid Bot, and that's going to be their version of their high school side hustle. So,
well, when you think about that, it gets really fun, right? Because now they could start a pizza shop.
Yeah.
Right? Anybody could.
Mm-hmm.
And they can just provide better service, but they can have the pizza making robot in the back, and the building would always be cleaned and stuff like that. And they don't need to figure out how to hire 20 people and do everything with taxes and payrolls and corporations and everything. Your kid can have a lemonade stand, just have a little helper behind him, just spreading out. It democratizes access to labor.
Mm-hmm. And going back to the key word I'll repeat is accessibility. Like making these robots so easy to use that more and more people can use them. I mean, before Aviana, we've already seen this play out with our customer base where people with different handicaps who couldn't do the work traditionally could now do it with one of our robots. And I'll never forget this. Earlier this year, we were at a customer's annual reunion, and they get together, they bring in all the leaders, and they wanted us to come in and talk about robots. And it was a conversation where they're like, we can't find enough people to do the work. How are we going to maintain our current rate of revenue or even grow it? Like, we just can't find workers. And that's all they talked about the whole time we were in there. And then we're packing our robots up, we're leaving the hotel, and this woman stops me in the hallway, and she's like, what's that? And she's pointing to the robot. So of course I tell her about what we do, and I ask her what she does. And her job was to help students with special needs transition from high school into the workplace. And they were at this hotel learning about laundry services. And I told her I've got a background working with the special needs community. Like, would they have any interest in learning how to operate a robot? So we delayed our travel back home, and we stayed in that hotel hallway. And I got to interact and teach 6 of them how to use the robot. And I'd be like, hey, would you ever be interested in getting paid to do this for a job? And their eyes just lit up. Like, I could operate a robot for a living. Like, this could be my job. Yeah. And you think about that, like they're on site to get to have a fulfilling career. It's incredible what this organization does. And like, they were learning to do laundry. And then you contrast that with or you could operate a robot.
Yep.
And just seeing all the opportunities that can now come online when robots' potential is fully realized, like that's what keeps me up at night because of the excitement.
I just think it, like, to your point, it extends your potential, right? And I think everybody will love that when it comes to them. I think the issue will be, for a little while, like, whose job does it take and when, and, stuff like that. And you'll hear a lot from people about, like, they say they can't find people, they just don't want to pay enough. You run into this logical problem where, like, how much can you pay somebody before the service doesn't come worthwhile to the customer? Yeah, honestly, I'll ask people all the time, like, if your lawn guy, a lot of people have lawn guys. I live in a middle-class neighborhood. And I said, if he charged you $50 an hour per guy that showed up to mow your lawn, you couldn't afford it. So there's a thing to this where, like, you got to find that balance. And so I think that's what's going to happen with robots, is it'll find its balance. It'll find where the price point gets high enough, you can keep paying people more to do the work, as long as the market's willing to pay that price back, right? But then when it doesn't, that's where robots start to come in to keep the price point where it's at, where people can tolerate it. And then we start to automate underneath that. And I think that's what happens.
I'm excited about where we're going.
Me too.
And again, we're just thrilled about this relationship we've got. Our robots are getting smarter every day, more productive. And thanks again for taking the time to sit down and share your thoughts and vision for where we go from here.
Thanks for having me.